Okay, this one that we're going to be doing right now is called the dummy. So take a moment, just like you always do, and kind of go through and read it to yourself and make comments. And then when you're done, come back to the video. So we're going to start with the title. And I think there are sort of like kind of two connotations when we think about the dummy. A, you can think about dummies in terms of dolls. And then B, you can think about dummies in terms of like kind of stupid, as a euphemism for stupid. And so there's like kind of two connotations, and one is a little bit more negative, one is a little bit more neutral, so that's interesting. Balancing me with your hand up my back. Listening to the voice you gave me. Right, so here we're talking a little bit about autonomy and croaking for truth. Croaking speaks to some kind of like stress or distress, right? When you croak, you keep me at it. So that kind of consistent or persistent, diligent work. Your lips don't move, but your eyes look desperate as hell. So it speaks to the kind of degree of stress that the second figure is under. Ask me something difficult, which feels like a challenge or directive. Maybe we could sing together. So like some kind of performance. This is also like a suggestion. So like the, first figure is sort of trying to help the second figure, right? Just teach me the right words. I learn fast, right? So again, that kind of power dynamics between the two of them, that one has to teach the other. I also think here the right words feels interesting. Like maybe there's a script involved. That there's like a right set of words that we have to do. Don't stare like that. So again, criticism, and also like sort of a command on the part of the speaker. I'll start where you leave off. So there's like a symbiosis or like a partnership between the two figures. I can't tell you anything if you don't throw me a cue line. A cue line is definitely something to do with a performance. And again, that sort of like the dynamic between the two of them speaks to the idea that like one relies on or needs the other. We're dying. So this performance is not going well. I also think it's really interesting, like, why is this line alone? Like, what is important about this line that it is like separated and has like these kind of like gaps on either side? So that's kind of interesting, and maybe that's worth coming back to later. So we're dying a death right here, which would be a terrible thing. Again, if we go back to the idea of a performance, that would be like a terrible thing for a performance. Can you dance? No, I don't suppose you'd be doing this if you could dance, right? So I don't know. That feels a little bit snarky, a little bit critical. But again, it speaks to the idea of like the failure of this performer to like not do a good job. Why do you keep me in that black box? So there's like a control factor here. I can ask questions too, that feels to me kind of like a challenge. Like the second figure is challenging the first figure. I can see that worries you. And tough. I love that this tough stands alone. The sort of syntax of that it's, like, again, it feels sort of like a challenge. The tough all by itself as a word feels kind of like a challenge, particularly in relationship to, I can see that worries you. Like, he's not concerned. that he might worry or concern the other person. So it feels, it's interesting. And again, this is not a sonnet, but it feels kind of like couplet-esque, as if it almost is like a sonnet, but it is not a sonnet. So that's interesting. So funny things happen to everyone on the way to most places. That feels like a super generic opening line. To an act. Come on. So again, this is our speaker. Oops, sorry. It's our speaker, and it feels like a challenge to me. You can do better than that, comma, can't you? This is definitely a challenge. And it's, again, a criticism. Did you guys figure out, like, what's happening? The little, like, the kind of, the thing that's happening here in the poem. The speaker is a ventriloquist dummy. And so the speaker is talking to the performer, the actual ventriloquist, which is the, your hand up my back, your lips don't move, but your eyes look desperate as hell. And the speaker, the performer, can't sing and dance. And then this line is probably the ventriloquist. And then this line is the dummy. So that's kind of fun. I thought it's like a fun and interesting poem. So we're going to leave a little bit of space for themes, and I'm going to come back to that. For right now, I'm going to talk about sort of elements of performance. And I also want to talk about, like, elements of control, because I think that that's interesting, and I sort of see, like, both pieces of that in this poem. So this idea of balancing me with your hand at my back, the voice you gave me speaks to both control and performance. You keep me at it speaks of control. Your lips don't move, we know has to do with the ventriloquist piece. Ask me something difficult is sort of this, like, defiance of the dummy, that the dummy is challenging the performer. Maybe we could sing the right word suddenly does make sense in terms of a script. I can start where you leave off speaks to the idea of, like, that kind of performance that a dummy would pick up, where the ventriloquists speak off. The cue line, dancing. The black box is probably for storage. I can see that worries you. And then this again does sort of feel like an opening line. So there's definitely something happening here in terms of, like, the performance aspect of this particular piece. So structure is, I don't think anything, like, super crazy. It's definitely, like, just, again, like a free verse poem, like we've seen, in a lot of the other poems. We've got 4 lines, 3 lines, 1 line, 4 lines, 2 lines. So there's some variety there. I would, again, talk about, like, sort of the pauses. I also think that here enjambment does a nice job sort of helping to establish voice and sort of, like, the character of the dummy. Just teach me, I can't tell you, we're dying creates a sense of, like, tension. I can ask questions too. I would also probably talk about the syntax of the poem and how that sort of, like, again, that word tough being on its own is really interesting to me in terms of the structure of the poem. So textual features, I would definitely talk about persona, which is that of the dummy. I would talk about the questions. We have already talked about sort of syntax and all that in the structure piece, so I'm not going to add that. And diction is up here, so I'm not necessarily going to add that. But there is the pronoun usage, I think you could potentially also talk about the we versus I, right? Just teach me, keep me at it. The voice you gave me is interesting. The persona of the dummy is something that we can kind of see multiple times in the poem, and sort of how the speaker sort of goes back and establishes that. We've sort of talked about that a little bit already too, so I'm not necessarily going to go back and do that. But the kind of rhetorical questions that the dummy also like kind of incorporates is something that's kind of worth thinking about too. Can you dance? Because and I would call them rhetorical in that who's actually asking it? Is it the dummy who has autonomy, or is it the performer? It's kind of an interesting question. So the kind of use of questioning is also interesting. And then point of view, we said the dummy. And at the risk of being super repetitive, we're just going to say first person. And he's talking to the ventriloquist. Right? And again, I just might like highlight some of these things we've kind of already looked at a couple of times. So I'm just going to sort of highlight those pieces so it doesn't feel like I'm repeating things a whole lot. So then we're going to come down really quick to this themes piece. And definitely we can talk about voice. We can talk about individualism. We can talk about autonomy. We can talk about power. I do think there's a literal thing here about it being a ventriloquist dummy, but I also think you could talk about this idea of it being a metaphor, and that the dummy could be sort of like any figure without power or autonomy, right? So this idea of like kind of being stuck and being stuck in a power dynamic where you're at the will of someone else who doesn't know what they're doing. So fun poem.